to the webinar where we will talk about the new performance data collection instruments and processes for RLF grantees. In this presentation, we will introduce the new instruments and metrics for the non-infrastructure programs by first placing them in the context of EDA's performance measurement practices and comparing them to the instruments that recently expired and have been replaced. We will then introduce the new instruments and briefly touch upon the research and the motivation behind the new instruments, as well as the data that they will collect. Finally, we will tell you what you can expect in both the short term and the long term.
EDA collects and reports on performance measures in compliance with the Government Performance and Results Act of 1993 that, as amended by the GPRA Modernization Act of 2010, establishes requirements for all agencies to collect, analyze, and report on their performance. The data that are collected under GPRA are reported in departmental publications and reviewed by key stakeholders such as the Office of Management and Budget, the Government Accountability Office, and Congress. Among other uses, EDA's performance data and targets are tied to annual budget requests and appropriations. There's also been increasing demand for evidence-based reporting for federal agencies, and collecting this data will help EDA meet this requirement. EDA also needs this information to support its values proposition to the U.S. taxpayers and for compliance with other requirements to be transparent and report to the public. Without this data to report to the public, we risk understating the value of EDA to the country, which could impact congressional funding decisions. Most importantly, this GPRA data helps us tell your story better. EDA's performance data are divided into two primary goals. EDA Performance Goal 1 focuses on physical infrastructure investments that promote private enterprise and job creation in economically distressed communities and regions. Grantees of public works and economic adjustment assistance, physical infrastructure, and revolving loan fund projects are subject to reporting under this goal. As an important note, all revolving loan fund grants awarded on or after June 1st, 2020 will be subject to the new non-infrastructure data collection system covered in this webinar. All RLFs made prior to that date will continue reporting under the ED 915 GPRA form. EDA Performance Goal 2 focuses on non-infrastructure investments that build community capacity to achieve and sustain regional competitiveness and economic growth. In this presentation, we are addressing the redesign of the system to meet the Goal 2 in EDA's performance practice.
EDA collects performance data using the ED 915, ED 916, ED 917, and ED 918 forms. The forms that have been revised and replaced by the new data collection instruments are the ED 916, 917, and 918. On the screen here, there's an example of the ED 915, which has been recently updated. So what are the key differences between the expired 916, 917, and 918 and the new versions? The expired forms were program focused. They were very much focused on partnership planning, university centers, and the trade and adjustment assistance for firms programs. They were narrow in scope as well. They focused on select outputs and outcomes. And they were PDF based, as well as an annual data collection. The new versions apply to all of EDA's non-infrastructure programs and can therefore accommodate a variety of projects and intended outcomes. They're based on years of novel research by leading research institutions and EDA. They're web-based, and so they allow for flexibility and easier record keeping. And the data collection is both semi-annual and annual, allowing us to gather information on outputs and activities, as well as on outcomes. It's important to repeat this point here that RLF awards made prior to June 1st, 2020 will continue to report on GPRA using the renewed ED 915 form until they receive a new EDA award. The new process that we're talking about in this presentation applies to new awards made on or after June 1st.
As mentioned before, The revised or new ED 916, ED 917, and ED 918 instruments are grounded in years of cooperative research between EDA and leading research institutions, including SRI International and UNC Chapel Hill. One of the results of this research was the economic development logic model, refined to fit a wide range of non-infrastructure economic development projects, their associated outputs or activities, and the short-term or intermediate capacity outcomes that were defined as key to sustainable long-term economic outcomes. From left to right, the logic model tracks initial or baseline conditions and capacity of a region where an applicant organization operates or of the region it serves, inputs, which are what the project needs to proceed. This includes EDA funding, the grantee or client's resources, etc. Outputs or program activities. These are the tangible products of the activities that the grantee conducts. Capacity outcomes that are intended to monitor a wide range of intermediate effects of the outputs or activities conducted under the project's scope of work. And finally, realized long-term economic development outcomes, which look at the effects of the EDA grant or project at the regional level using third-party economic indicators. The list for the baseline conditions as well as for the realized outcomes are non-exhaustive and is expected to evolve in light of various economic events. In this presentation, we focus on program outputs and capacity outcomes since these are the data that we will be collecting directly from the grantees with the newly revised ED 916, ED 917, and ED 918 instruments. On this slide, you will see the type of information we will be collecting on a semi-annual basis from the grantees. The ED 916 instruments is organized into the same categories of outputs or program activities as the logic model in the previous slide. Please note that not all categories of outputs will apply to you. Grantees are only expected to answer questions that are relevant to their scope of work. Thanks to the advanced capabilities of Qualtrics, we have embedded logic in the questionnaire that allows you to skip any category that's not relevant to your scope of work by indicating no to a gateway question. You will be expected to respond to the applicable questions on program outputs cumulatively on a semi-annual basis for the duration of the period of performance of your grant.
If under your grant scope of work, your organization serves clients or beneficiaries directly, which RLFs do, you will receive an annual questionnaire ED 917. Once again, the instrument is organized into categories of questions with flexibility to bypass any of them that are irrelevant to your project's scope of work. The instrument is split into two main sections. The first section asks about the more traditional, longer-term outcomes, such as job creation and retention, private investment leveraged, and operating revenue changes. In each case, you will have the option to click non-applicable or select an option that states that such outcomes are expected but not known at the time of your responding to the questionnaire. The second section covers a broader set of capacity outcomes to allow our grantees to report on important milestones and intended outcomes that can be more specific to their grants. Unlike before, we will be capturing information on such key outcomes as new product introductions, expansion of business networks, and new financing and human capital improvements.
RLF awards are a bit unique in their GPRA reporting cadence under this new process. While other awards of non-infrastructure programs will be reporting based on award start date, RLF GPRA reporting is based on the RLF recipient's fiscal year. RLF recipients will be due to report around their fiscal year end and around mid-fiscal year. The first semi-annual questionnaire will be distributed either around fiscal year end or around mid-year, whichever comes first, and every 6 months thereafter. The first annual questionnaire will be due along with the second semi-annual questionnaire and every 12 months thereafter. Allow me to walk through a couple examples of how this will work. In the first two rows, the examples show an RLF award made in October. So row 1, The award is made in October and the fiscal year end is December. Therefore, the first semi-annual report will be due for September, and the second semi-annual report will be due June, which is the mid-year for this RLF recipient. The first annual report using ED 917 will be due for June. So that is consistent with the second semi-annual report. In the second row, going a little quicker, for an October award where the fiscal year end is June, the first semi-annual report will be due for December, which is the mid-year for this RLF recipient. The second report will be due in June, which coincides with the fiscal year end in this case. And the first annual report using Form ED 917 will be due for June, which in this case coincides with the fiscal year end. In these next two examples, using an award that was hypothetically made or will be made in March with a December fiscal year end, June, which is the mid-year, for this RLF, the first semi-annual report would be due. And the second semi-annual report will be due for December, which coincides with the fiscal year end. But the first annual report is always due along with the second semi-annual report, whether that's the fiscal year end or the mid-year. So in this last example, an award made in March with a June fiscal year end, first semi-annual report is due in June, second semi-annual report is due in December, which coincides with the mid-year for this RLF. The first annual report, again, Form ED 917, is due for December. This new reporting process applies to both CARES Act RLF awards and regular RLF awards, so it is possible that you will be reporting on two separate awards. Some EDA grant recipients have an RLF award and a partnership planning award. As a reminder, each award is reported individually and not cumulatively across all active EDA awards. Another important reminder is that you are only reporting on activities and outcomes as they pertain to the scope of work for your EDA award. For this reason, good record keeping will be critical to your ability to easily respond to the questionnaires when you receive them. When completing the ED 916 semi-annual questionnaire on outputs, most RLF recipients will find that the financing support category is the most applicable to their scope of work. All grantees should make sure to look through all questions ahead of time using the PDF versions available on the EDA website to determine which categories and which questions are applicable to the award before receiving the electronic questionnaire. One of the first questions in the questionnaire asks the recipient to identify the target beneficiary or beneficiaries. For RLF recipients, the target beneficiary should be revolving loan fund borrowers. When completing the ED 917 annual questionnaire on outcomes, RLF recipients may find applicable questions throughout the multiple categories of the questionnaire. This really depends on the activities of the borrowers. This is why it is important for RLF recipients to encourage their borrowers to track activities and outcomes that you, as the EDA grantee and RLF lender, will include in your GPRA reporting.
Some important reminders and tips. It is important to note that not all categories of questions will apply to the outputs or outcomes you expect from your projects, so you will be able to bypass any category that is not applicable to your project as skip or select NA in the cases of inapplicable questions. Qualtrics also has it so that if a category of output is not applicable to you, you answer yes or no to a gateway question. So if a category of output is not applicable to you, you can answer no to that gateway question and you'll be able to skip that entire category of output and the questions within. You may access PDF versions of the questionnaires on our website at www.eda.gov/performance/GPRA. The last section of the questionnaire contains a geographic information and narrative section where you can submit a success story or any other information that you would like to share about the project. We're really encouraging all grantees to provide geographic information, as this will help us to map exactly where awards are and where the impact areas are. All outcomes you report on should be attributable to the scope of work under the EDA grant. So yes, you may have several awards, but you're only reporting on the grant that is in the distribution message that you will receive, and it's also your EDA grant that you're reporting on is also in Qualtrics for you as a reminder. You can save your responses and return to filling out the questionnaire later. So grantees will have a month to complete the questionnaire, and you can X out of the Qualtrics page and come back later, and you will be able to continue where you left off. You can download your responses to keep track of your data, and we're encouraging all grantees to keep a record of their responses as well. So what's next? Semi-annual questionnaires will be distributed only during the period of performance of your grant. Your annual questionnaires will be distributed for 5 years since the start of the grant. Your EDR will let you know when the questionnaires are scheduled for distribution, and RLF grantees with multiple awards will receive separate emails or links to complete their questionnaires. You will be reporting on 1 award per questionnaire.
And don't forget about these important resources. Please make sure you visit the new GPRA webpage for demos on how to complete your questionnaire and other useful information on the new metrics. We'd mentioned before the GPRA page for the PDF versions of the questionnaire. So this is a brief demo of where to find those GPRA PDF versions. If you scroll down on this page, you'll see the hyperlinked ED916 to that PDF version of the questionnaire. And if you scroll down just a little bit more, you'll see the hyperlinked ED917. So please make sure to check out the website for all of the questions that you might have, including the demos and recorded webinars that are already up on the website, as well as the frequently asked questions available from the GPRA page. You'll probably find an answer to your question here, but we would encourage you to read through that. And if you still have a question, to please reach out to your EDR or email programevaluation@eda.gov with any further questions you might have. And we thank you for listening to this webinar. We know that there's a lot of information shared here, so we would encourage you again to reach out with any questions and start preparing for your first semi-annual report.